again. Oh, perfect. That's really well done.
Hi. I'm Manning Peterson. I'm a lead software engineer at the American Medical Association, as is Brian Clement here. And then these are two volunteer partners, Schwab, backend developer extraordinaire, and Lauren Burroughs, who's our front-end dev and awesome person. So we are going to be talking pretty in-depth about these six landing pages that we built for the AMA, and a lot of us struggle with how to display and organize component information. That's pretty much what we're going to be talking about here. I'm going to go through this really quick. So our business requirements for these topics pages, we wanted to have, the AMA has several web properties that have content in different areas, like the Journal of American, the JAMA, which is our publication. We have a Wire blog, and then we have a corporate website. And our content people wanted to have a specific topic page where they could put in content from all of our different resources and drive membership or drive advocacy or drive people to one topic. So it was a way to centralize information and provide a portal for people visiting the site to find out a lot about the opioid epidemic, for example. So some of our requirements were to have reusable content, customizable layouts, different sets of components on each page, a content editor-friendly interface, which is the dream, and the ability for editors to create all of those above without having to call a developer. And we had a bunch of initial architecture ideas. Do we do paragraphs, panels, blocks? And we had a little bit of experience already with this. We built some hub pages in D7, and we abused the paragraphs module. Is everyone familiar with the paragraphs module? It really should be called the components module or something, because it's not always paragraphs, but it's a way of, what?
Those are new components.
Well, I know.
Names are hard. Names are hard on all of us.
Names are really hard on things. And so we had built these hub pages, which attempted to do the same thing we were doing with the topics pages, but we had a lot of problems. We were having multiple nested paragraphs. It was hard for editors to use. We would run into memory issues on these giant pages, and the end layout was inflexible for the content editors. And they didn't really know what they wanted, so we built every possible combination that they might need, and then it turned out they really just wanted a page that had like 3 cards on it. So we wanted to throw away that and start in D8, start over again, and figure out what to do. But on the AMA side, this was the first D8 site that we had built, and so what we wanted to do is have this be, we wanted permission to fail on this project. And by that I meant we wanted to try different things, and we didn't want to get totally locked into one single architecture, because we are planning on building, we are in the process of building a new D8 site that combines all of those into one code base, which will launch later this fall, but we all wanted to get our feet wet with this kind of project. So, Audie and I had a throwdown, and what this was is, basically, we were trying to decide whether we want to use paragraphs or to use Panelizer and IPE, which I thought would be a better content editor experience. It's sometimes harder, but there's trade-offs, and we'll talk about that. So what we did is, and you actually ended up doing both sides of the throwdown, but we had these different approaches, and we got in a room and we battled it out, and we all voted, and then we decided to.
There was some gerrymandering involved.
Huh?
There was some gerrymandering
involved.
Okay. Anyway, so this is the topics pages. This is a little bit of a picture of here. So we had a new CXO, and his challenge, the challenge we had was to put all of our expertise on one page to boost membership. And so this was also a new process where we were doing Agile. We did do Agile as a team, but we wanted to start doing Agile as an organization with our different stakeholders. And the results are we designed new components based on the existing visual language. We have a style guide that we use, and we built the the foundation for our platform, which we will be extending this year. And we built DTT. Is this your slide?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry.
No, keep going.
No, I think I'm going to actually turn this over.
Oh, no. I mean, we made it, but you can tell.
You keep.
Okay.
Yeah.
You're doing good.
Okay, thanks. And anyway, last fall we delivered the MVP, which were these 6 pages, which were hugely successful. And the CEO and everybody, these pages were an example of what we want to do going forward as a team and as an organization. So we're going to talk about creating our editor experience. I'm going to turn it over to Avi to explain this. All right.
Yeah, so as Manning said, we wanted to give editors a lot of flexibility in a relatively short period of development time. Our initial timeline for this was pretty tight. And yeah, we wanted to use the kind of latest and greatest stuff available to us in V8. At the time we started this, October or something, 8.4 was still in like RC1 or like, no, it was like alpha.
Yeah.
It was the first thing I tested this on. That was horrible, and anyway. We started building on 8.4 so we could take advantage of a lot of this new stuff. But as Manning said, the first thing we did was have this paragraphs versus panels throwdown. I've kind of got a couple videos just demonstrating the functionality. So this is my recreation of of a paragraphs, a flexible paragraphs-based layout page. So here's a topic page. There are a couple sections. So here's a 50% wide container that would be the center. There's the sidebar. Each of these regions has a number of different types of content in it. This is the brand new paragraphs editor experimental interface. It does allow a little bit of like better reordering and kind of expanding, collapsing. But as you can see, this is still a pretty bulky interface. It doesn't give the content team any ability to see what their resultant page is going to look like. Also trying to drag these giant paragraphs around the page if you wanted to reorder them is basically impossible. You can like do show row weights, but what content editor is going to know what show row weights actually means? This was the approach that I was comfortable with at first, and as soon as I built this, I was like, this is not good. So enter panels. Panels and I have always had a rough relationship. I've been reluctant to use panels for a long time, and this was kind of the time that I came to love it. So this is the end result of the content editor interface. This is our kind of example content. You can see with the panels in place editor, an editor is able to click edit, drag and drop content to different regions of the page in the actual interface to see the content as it is. If they want to edit the content, they can click edit, bring up the IPE, edit a node, maybe change some links, hit update, and then they can see their changes in real time right on that page. So I'm going to talk through a lot of how we built this, but this is, as soon as we saw these things side by side, and I kind of saw the power of IPE and custom blocks, I was pretty much sold. So I'm going to take a quick kind of run through of the recipe for building this whole editor interface. So it's kind of going to be at a high level, like site building perspective. I'm going to dig into a couple pieces, and then we can talk about things later. So the first piece that kind of tied all this together, as I said, panels, panelizer, and the IPE. I should check my slides. So the first thing to do when you turn on all these modules, you just add a panelizer field to your node. This kind of enables all of the magic with Panelizer to happen. So Panelizer, if you're not familiar with it, allows you to panelize individual nodes, panelize a node body basically. And once you turn it on, you have the option to allow users to select their display and to have each content item have its display customized. So this I was really reluctant about, and I actually ended up talking to some folks in Drupal Slack, just being like, hey, if I put a bunch of blocks in panels, is that like, in my experience, that's always been config, and like having your content as config is dicey. But it turns out that that's not actually config anymore, and that all of these things are treated as content. And if a content editor moved a block around in a node, we weren't going to have to re-export all our config from production. So that ended up really well. Once you set these up, Panelizer gives you the option to set some basic defaults for the page. We pretty much kept the pages totally blank and just set a default layout. We were originally going to have a couple different layouts that the editors could choose from. We ended up descoping that for a lot of different reasons, because scope. This is again what Panelizer looks like. So once you turn on panels, you get this wonderful interface where you can add blocks, move blocks around, all kind of on the node view page, not the edit page. The weird part that I had to get over was like, if you hit the edit button on the node, you don't see anything. And really, all of this just lives as UUIDs and regions, and there's not actually any content on the node. That also made me scared, but I got over it. Anyway, the next piece that we brought into this was layouts. So with 8.4, we got core layouts, and that was wonderful. All of this stuff was possible in D7 and D8 before 8.4, but I actually went to the documentation pages, and the documentation for like how to add a new layout to a Panelizer page is like 600 words or something for D7 and like 200 words for D8 for D8 after 8.4. So 8.4 makes adding new layouts a very trivial experience because it's Drupal 8. You just add a YAML file. Of course, what else would you do? So adding a new layout with layout discovery. On the left here, we've got our theme.layouts.yaml file. So we've just got an array in here called bookend, and this really defines the entire layout. We've got a label and a category. We tell it where to look for the template files, and then we set the regions that we want. So we've got a left rail, main content. We've got a little section that hovers over the right rail. And then in our theme file, we're really just kind of setting the wrappers for these pieces of content. There's a little bit here. This section was optional, so we want to like not have this section if there's nothing in here. So we're saying don't render it if it's empty. Otherwise, yeah, this is a really straightforward template that allows us to do some really powerful layout functionality. If we wanted to have a second layout here, we would just add another bookend array item to this array, or add another item to this array called what was one of the other layouts, like heavy left. Put in another twig file, and we'd have a whole new option. Custom blocks were the next piece of this. As I kind of alluded to, and if you don't know, blocks are entities in D8. This is a huge change from the way blocks functioned in D7, and it means that we can have instances of blocks as content instead of config. That makes everything magical. It means you can place multiple instances of a block, which was always really hard. It means you don't have to manage config as much. So the bad, we did run into an issue here. Panelizer has some issues with blocks. When blocks get deleted, Panelizer doesn't necessarily know that they get deleted, and there's some issues there. There's an open issue with some patches on it that you can review. These slides will be up later, so you can click the links. Also, digging into the data can be a bit of work. So as I said, with Panelizer, there's a lot of kind of nesting of the data. So you've got your node with a UUID, and then you have to get to the block instance, and then digging fields there. So if you're trying to get a title out or get something to metadata fields, it takes a little bit of work. This is so once we build these custom blocks, we needed the content team to be able to add them to the page. Luckily, the panel's IPE makes this super easy. There's a little button that says create content, and it exposes all of our custom blocks to the content editors, so they can see all of their options. They click the button, they get a nice little interface to add their blocks. Next piece, entity reference and view mode field. Don't click on this module link. Don't look at the number of people using this module or its development state.
It's just us.
We didn't build this, but I found this module and I'm in love with it. All this does is takes a regular entity reference field and adds a drop-down to select what view mode you want to display that entity in. This is magical. It's like so wonderful. On the left side here is what the config page looks like. So you just select what kind of bundle you want to select, and then what view modes are going to be enabled for the editor to view. So we use this to build a really flexible main content field that sometimes they might want to have 2 hero items and then a list of smaller items. Sometimes they want to have just a list of smaller items. We didn't really know, and we wanted to build the layout to be as flexible as possible. So the team can just go in here, add their items, set exactly what they want them to be rendered as, and that's a huge amount of power that we're putting in the hands of the content team. Previously this would either be an entity queue where we said all right, render item 1 and 2 as a hero, and then 3, 4, and 5 as a smaller version, or some sort of stacked views or whatever. All of those things are a lot less flexible, and so I thought this was a really nice solution. Inline entity form. Inline entity form I'd used before, and it's wonderful, but now we have form modes. Form modes are magic and wonderful. If you haven't used form modes, you should definitely use them. So form modes let us, if you're not familiar, form modes are similar to view modes. It's just for the edit form. So what this lets us do is say we want to provide editors a streamlined way to add nodes to the page. So we turn this on, disable the author field and the date entered field and the revisions and all that stuff, so that we just get to the meat of the content that the team wants to add. Inline entity form, then we just have a little field set that lets you add a new node or add an existing node. These boxes get added right in line in the entity form, and it's a really, really nice experience for the editors, especially for smaller pieces of content where you don't want them to be creating new nodes for every item in a reference list. All right, the special sauce. So everything before that, apart from the little bit of code that you have to do for layouts, was basically turn on a module and configure it, and you're done. We did a little bit of custom code to make this all kind of piece together well. So panels IPE is still a little rough when you turn on. The IPE is rendered in your front end, so you're exposing an admin form in your front end theme. That, unless you have a front end theme that has all kinds of form styling on it, is probably not going to work out well. Also, this is so the left side is before, and actually we had all of our web form styling exposed in this, and it was just big and horrible and ugly. So in order to get to what's on the right, we basically copied a whole bunch of CSS files from 7 into our front end theme. It's super hacky and ugly, but now we have an admin form in our front end.
Somewhere one of our feds is cringing
And by
at the fact that we're admitting this to people.
in the back of
Yeah, she's in the back.
By we mean Chelsea. So one more piece of this. The top line here is what IPE gives you by default. So this is like every possible block or every possible thing that you could add into panels. We saw that and I was like, no. So I think it was a little bit of custom code or some permissions. Yeah. And we took all that out. So now all the content team has is a button to add new things and a button to add existing custom blocks. So that custom is a list of all of the custom block instances that already exist. So that made the user experience, the content team experience a lot more streamlined. All right, that's good.
And we shuffle. Yeah, so awesome. We were able to create content and get that moving. We also needed it to look like a thing. And so as we were developing the topics pages as our foundation for what we're working on now, which will be the new integrated AMA site, we wanted to make sure that we were doing it, putting our best front end foot forward too. Yeah, just a little bit. So our goal for this was A, style guide driven development, and B, ideally not having to duplicate our work and just be able to use the front end code that we're doing for the style guide driven development in our Drupal theme. Has anybody here tried doing that before? Just okay. It's not always fun. I've got a few gray hairs from it. So first goal was working with our UX team. In our workflow, the way that the AMA teams work together is that the IT team is in charge of anything that involves code at all. And the UX team is designing wireframes, and it's more collaborative than it was, but especially at the beginning of this, it was a lot of throwing stuff over the wall. And so our goal was A, to bring those teams together to be more collaborative, and B, to get things in the browser faster, so that our business owners aren't signing off on a piece of paper, they're signing off on a website. So the plan was that going forward with the style guide driven development, we can easily scope new pages because we understand the functionality. We've created patterns before, we can easily reuse them. And we can facilitate that collaboration between the IT and the UX teams so that they understand the constraints that we're working in and we understand the constraints that they're working in. And create a new style guide. So, that seems like we're not in the right place. Anyways.
You can
Yeah, ignore
tell
that.
people.
Okay. So our CXO, who set out this huge hurdle for us to overcome with these topics pages, was completely overwhelmed, not only with the functionality of how the pages acted and worked and all of the content that we were able to fit into them, but also the fact that they were fully responsive, worked awesome on all browsers, and really like above and beyond. The work that the UX team and the IT team did together was phenomenal. So our plan was to start with Pattern Lab and use that as our living style guide for the project. As I said, we kind of wanted to take the wireframes that were given from us to UX and get them into Pattern Lab, into rapid prototyping as quickly as possible. So the ideal was awesome. So we already have the HTML, we already have the CSS. How do we get that into Drupal without having to copy and paste and tweak and whatever? So enter round one of our style guide. This is just a picture of the topics page mockup, or the prototype that exists. And this is live, there are links, you guys can check it out later. It's all public. And so in what we're lovingly calling SG1, our first iteration, we were able to start with Pattern Lab. We're using a Twig version, so it'll go right into Drupal. And we're prototyping quickly, and we're directly ingesting the CSS and the JavaScript into Drupal. So pretty close. One of the ways that we're doing that is we are using all of the symlinks. So when you're working on local development and when you're in development by default, our build process goes through and links the assets from the Pattern Lab style guide, which is a composer dependency, from the vendor directory into the theme files. So these are our CSS, which starts out as Sass and is compiled into CSS, into the theme directory, and then our JavaScript. And part of what's making that work is that we're actually using Drupal's the way Drupal attaches behaviors in JS within our style guide, so that any JavaScript that we're using from the beginning is going to behave the exact same way in the static environment that it will in the dynamic one later. So, awesome. We were really proud of that. We were able to get things moving really quickly and get feedback on them and iterate. And we really built out a great collaboration between the UX team. But we knew we could do better. So, SG2. We reformatted and reiterated to set ourselves up with an even better foundation for the full integrated AMA site. And so what you're seeing here is a screenshot of the new topic page prototype. So in SG2, the goal was to expand on what we had already built. So we're already using the CSS and the JavaScript in Drupal, but we want the twig too, because we don't know how to settle. And the goal was we create it once and we want to use it everywhere. Like we want to know that it's going to be the same thing in all places. We want to be able to test it in our style guide and know it's going to work in the Drupal, and ease our minds a little. So how do we do the thing? So I pulled up an example pattern. You might have seen this earlier. This is a tools block. This is a block in Drupal. It's an organism in Pattern Lab, and it's created of a couple different molecules. It's generally divided up into two sections, this like resource list at the top, and then these like learn more links at the bottom. And it looks pretty straightforward, but it actually gets kind of complicated. However, this is the twig that lives in Pattern Lab that's driving that beautiful piece. Right now you're just seeing like I'm calling in a heading for what'll be the block title in Drupal. I'm calling in a molecule called tools list, which we'll dig into in a second. And that's just generating the list of all of those icons and links to PDFs or PowerPoints, whatever. And then at the bottom, we're calling in another list, what we're calling tools learn more, which is just a list of links generally offsite. So if we dig into, okay, so that's the organism. If we dig into the things that are actually the meat of that, these are the twig files that populate the molecules within that. So you'll see, again, still pretty straightforward. If we're looking at the tools list, so we're talking about those icons with a title and some metadata, we're just looping them through an LI. We're including a little bit of configuration there around the tool to really format the icon and everything separately. But most of what we're doing is creating a twig block and putting it in a list and then wrapping each LI. And similarly on the learn more, same kind of concept. We're creating another twig block. We added a heading, and then we have another block inside of it. And for each LI in that list, we loop through and print out a link. Not overly complicated, but it's a good amount of work when you start to reverse engineer it. So how does this actually work? So those are all the Pattern Lab files, but how do I actually use them in Drupal? So everything that I've shown you up until this point is how do we get the static Pattern Lab to do a static thing? And like I said, we're using in SG1, we had already set up that we were going to use the Pattern Lab as a composer dependency. So it's a dependent of our project. And when we build our project, it creates that repository in our vendor directory, and then it'll symlink those CSS and JavaScript files. In this case, it also goes ahead and creates sort of another directory where it's symlinking all of the twig files as well into the theme. So we now have that as our default on Drupal when you're developing locally, that you're going to have all of these symlinks, which is awesome, especially if everything you want has already been prototyped first, and then you're moving on to theme. Like you've already prototyped it, you've already done all of the configuration, site building development, and you're ready to theme. That's really awesome because all of that code already lives up on GitHub Pages. It's already in the assets that we're pulling in as part of the tag for our composer dependency. And all of that will work perfectly for you. And when you build the artifact, what will happen is instead of linking those files, it'll copy them directly to the correct place. However, the wrench that we kind of threw in that is because our UX team doesn't write HTML and CSS, because that's part of the Fed's responsibility, that means that sometimes we have to make a thing in Pattern Lab and immediately make it in Drupal the exact same, which is a little hard if you're waiting to like make a PR, merge it, deploy it, make sure all the code's final, go back into Drupal, do it again. It's really frustrating. So the wrench that we throw into this is that I want to sit down at my computer as a front-end developer and be able to have my Pattern Lab up in one window and my Drupal up in the other and make a change and see it magically just happen in both places, no matter what.
Because we like pain.
Because we like pain. So the solution we engineered was as part of our provisioning, we can switch it to say, I don't want you to look at the vendor directory when you're building. I want you to look at this local copy I have of the same repository. And this is a change that we make but we don't commit, and that's terrible, I know, but it's a thing. So I want you to look at this sibling directory that I have to my Drupal site. It's the Pattern Lab repository, but it only exists locally. So instead of symlinking from the vendor directory, it'll symlink to that. And there's additional help from UI patterns and components modules. These are both really fabulous, and I could talk for 40 minutes on just them, but there are links. Go hang out and try them out. But so what that gets me in Drupal is that means that same organism that we looked at, I can just extend from Pattern Lab to Drupal. So when this is my Drupal, it's a block template. So when Drupal looks at this, it says, okay, go find organisms and then that twig template. And because I'm already pulling in those twig templates into my theme, it sort of knows like where to look for organisms, molecules, atoms. And you can see it's doing the exact same. It's using the same block extends that we were using in the style guide. And it's pulling in and replacing that content with, instead of whatever the content was I was telling it from Pattern Lab, I'm using field title, the field tools, etc. So again, well and good, but it seems like there's still probably some stuff going on in those fields. And there is. Similarly, the way that the molecules were structured, the fields are now extending those original molecules that we looked at that the organism was ingesting. So where we're using molecules in Twig, we're now correlating those to fields in Drupal. So we have field templates that do the same thing. Field content tools, field list, and field content tools, field learn more. And they're doing the same thing. They're extending those original molecule files from Pattern Lab, going and finding those either symlinked or linked directly, depending on if you're local or on an artifact, and looping each one through and making the markup match, which is the magic that we asked for. Ultimately, that came out of that. It meant that now I can sit down at my computer and I can build a thing in Pattern Lab, and I can see that same thing in Drupal, and the markup will match. It will ingest the same Twig files, it will ingest the same CSS files, it will ingest the same JavaScript files, and it means I do my job a whole lot faster because I do it once and not twice. Yeah. Configuration.
So this was our first, at the AMA, this was our first Drupal 8 site, so it was kind of, our first foray into the configuration management stuff that I'm sure you all are familiar with in Drupal 8 now. We were coming from, kind of a shell-shocked, terrifying experience of working with features in Drupal 7. But even as great as configuration management is in Drupal 8, it's still, config isn't a one-size-fits-all kind of a deal. So, we found that, as developers in our local environments, we wanted certain things like devel and searchkint and database logging. Our UAT QA people needed masquerade so they can try different user roles to make sure the functionality that we defined worked correctly for the right people, and, shield module to keep people from seeing that site. Stakeholders had things they wanted in the production environment, including their sample authentication for our SSO environments, and a bunch of great Acquia stuff like Lift and Content Hub. So in D7, our experience was, we had a custom script that pulled a database backup down and imported that into our local and copied the file system down with an rsync. And then we had to enable and disable a lot of things. Otherwise, we would get all kinds of warnings about Acquia lift or any number of things that were configured in the production environment but didn't work correctly in our locals. And then our DA experience prior to config split was we didn't live this way very long. We found config split pretty early on, but when you run your config export, you get everything that you've ever enabled or that's enabled currently rather, and so you get a lot of stuff that you get into a commit this, don't commit that kind of scenario. So here there's all kinds of Acquia Content Hub configuration that wants to be exported to my local config because that's what's in the production database. Acquia Purge, things, all this stuff that I don't need locally and don't want. So now we use config split. So that allows us to split out configuration kind of on a per environment or per whatever basis. You can define kind of as many splits as you want. And it will take that config out of your main sync directory, or we call it config, but I think maybe in core it's sync. And it moves that out into the splits you defined. So, and you can split things with a complete split, which is take this entire module and everything kind of wholesale and move that out of your base configuration and put that into your split config. So, shield, whole modules, that's a good use case for those. We also have conditional splits, which will leave primary configuration in the main sync directory, but if you happen to be in one of the split environments, it'll read from a new file defined there. The documentation for config split's really, really good, so I suggest you go look at it. And so here's an example of our local config split. And if you can, hopefully the font size is big enough, but on the left is the config split.config-split.local.yaml. So this is how our local, I didn't choose these names. This is how our local is defined. And you can see here that this is the folder, and this all gets defined in the UI. And then exports to this YAML, so you don't have to write anything. But this is the folder we specified where our split stuff will go. You can see that these modules have been moved out of core.extension.yaml, and they now exist in this file, which is the only file for the split that exists in the main sync repository at this point. So everything you see here, dblog, devel generate kint, and search kint, those all are now defined as part of this split. So on the right, you'll see this is our file structure, and you can see that everything kind of dblog, devel is these settings are all here. If you look here, blacklist, this is where individual pieces of configuration can get defined as being part of this split. So in this case, the file system and the performance settings we also have split. So, and you can see those correspond to these last two pieces of configuration right here. So that's really great for us locally. Our test and our stage environment has quite a lot of other stuff. It's got all of our Acquia things because that's where it's hosted. It's got Cloudflare, Purge things. Again, file system and the performance settings also split. Those are kind of standardized across all of our sites. They each have to have something different depending on where they're at. But and then here's prod, well, a little bit simpler. But so this has given us kind of real nice user experience when we pull down the database from the live site and we just run our build scripts and do a config import. It should say nothing needs to be imported, or run a config export. There should be no prod config is getting put into our base configuration that we're not aware of and we're not controlling for. So it works kind of from a high level. The environment that you want to be using is set in your settings.php. So for us, being in Acquia, we have Acquia environment variables that tell us if we're in production stage or a dev site, and if we're local, we have our Ansible build roles that tell us that. So the code looks like this. You can see we've got all the environments that we have defined splits for in this variable, and this loop just kind of checks through if you're on your Acquia site, and basically match that environment config to true, and that's it. So locally, we've got config local status equals true, and that's what indicates to us that that's where to look for our active configuration.
So, yeah, this all has to happen because config split by default just says define a split environment and then tell me if it's on or off. So config split doesn't know anything about these things, so you have to kind of, based on the environments you have, figure out how you're going to turn each of those split environments on or off. So that's kind of, instead of flipping it all in the UI in every different environment, this automates that whole process.
Yeah, and you can still override this with the global config variable, which is like, if I don't know why you ever do this. This is a terrible example. That's definitely not because I just wrote this slide 20 minutes before we walked in here. But if you wanted to set your pre-processing to true in your settings PHP and override what is defined in your config, you can do it just like this. So if you have environment variables that you need to use to set certain things, you can still define that stuff in settings PHP, and have all that stuff kind of working well with your configuration system. And you can also see, using the config get command in Drush, you can use the include overridden flag on there. So, if I want to look at what's defined in config, I can do Drush config get and then define the config that I'm after. So I can see that pre-processing JavaScript is set to false in my configuration, but if I include the overridden, I can see that I have set it to true somewhere else. So that's a kind of handy way to just kind of stay on top of what you're, if you're in the UI and I forgot that you had these variables set in your settings PHP or somewhere else, and you're confused why you're not seeing something that you think you should be seeing, this is sort of the way to get at it. So yeah, that was kind of a huge thing for us. Configuration locally was always kind of really tragic, and this is one of my kind of favorite things. All the other stuff that we've done is we've helped the stakeholders a lot, but every once in a while it's nice to get in something that helps out the dev team as well. So I don't know, you want to talk about lessons learned?
Yeah, so our lessons learned, we built flexible layouts with drag and drop with the panels in place editor and all the awesome custom blocks. We did rapid prototyping with our UX team and used Pattern Lab, and then our lives are a lot better with the configuration split. So what's next? I made this slide. Yesterday, 8.5 was released, and Layout Builder is now in core. And Layout Builder is how we want to do layout, panelizer type things going forward. So we haven't really started working with this yet, but this is, I'm really sorry about the colors. I was hoping to make people laugh on the last. But Layout Builder is the effort to get all of this, because there's been so many different ways to do this, and it's been ugly, and you hated panels, and this has just been a problem for a really long time. And there needs to be one approach in core to do it. And so like Tim Plunkett and a lot of really amazing people have done a lot of really great work with Layout Builder. So that's the next thing we're going to iterate on. Thank you. And do we have questions? Wes?
I don't know if there's anybody, and I don't want to out anybody necessarily, but from the original vote between panelizer and paragraphs, anybody here from the other side of that vote?
From the paragraph side?
Yeah.
No.
Let's take another vote.
Yeah, the question was who was wanting to do paragraphs.
Can you summarize what their reasons for their continued votes were?
Well, we all decided to go with panels, but
Yeah, I mean,
he was the paragraphs advocate.
Yeah, I mean, I started advocating for paragraphs, and just because that's what I had always used, and like I said, pretty soon after I started prototyping the here's what we would have to do with paragraphs if we actually wanted to do all these things. I was like, yeah, paragraph sucks for this. I mean, paragraphs has a lot of power, but it's not a layout builder. So yeah, I mean, by the end, nobody was arguing for paragraphs.
And paragraphs is great if you have a really clearly defined content model, and you know what your pages are going to look like. Our content editors didn't know any of that. So this offers a lot more flexibility to them than paragraphs did, in a way that's friendlier to them. But now we're have some cases where we're going to use paragraphs inside Layout Builder. So we go back. I mean, like, paragraphs is a really great module. And
There's still a place for paragraphs
Yeah.
in our site,
In our
We're not
site.
done with it yet.
just not there.
And in the world.
Yeah.
I'm still getting these paragraphs on every site that I build.
Are you using paragraphs inside your panels?
Not on this page, but we're arguing about that now.
Yeah.
There's a throwdown in the
It's kind of like
background.
all entity references inside those custom blocks.
Can I follow up on the paragraphs?
Yeah.
So have you had a chance to play around with multilingual support or with like workflow moderation in the context of Panelizer?
Okay, the question is about whether we've worked with multi-site and workflow. I mean, multilingual, I'm sorry, multilingual. We don't deal with multilingual at all because it's the American Medical Association, and you know, all doctors speak English, right? But that's something that we don't have to worry about. Workflow is something that we have to worry about, and we're definitely gonna have to worry about that with the AMA1 site going forward. Right now, we had a controlled group of editors that were editing these topics pages that we fully trusted, and we're gonna have to revisit that. I don't know how good the workflow moderation is going to be using this approach. I think there's problems with it.
So it's fair to say that the topics pages are more of like a landing page, and that the entirety of the site is not going to have that same requirement?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. We have much stricter, like, going forward, we're going to have much more defined content models and use cases for specific pages. But yeah, in looking at the topics pages specifically, like, it was really like, how can we make it as flexible as possible so that people can use this as a place to get to the other AMA information out there.
Because really, yeah, all of the content in this whole situation is really just metadata.
Yeah.
So the whole kind of use case was AMA has a lot of properties with a lot of information. We want to consolidate a lot of that into a place. We don't have the time or money to actually consolidate it, or necessarily the need, but we want to be able to give people a single place where they can get to a lot of kind of disparate content sources.
Oh, and one really cool thing that we didn't mention is that the person who was building these topics pages, you know, we launched it, and then he had a couple weeks to build these, and he built all of his pages in a day, and then he's like, well, let's just launch them. And it was Halloween, and so we had to launch early because they were done, and he said this was really an easy thing for him to do. So I think by putting all of our work into thinking about the content editor experience, it was very helpful.
Make it a little harder so you don't have to launch on Halloween now.
Pardon?
You make it harder so you didn't have to launch on Halloween, that's what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We did launch on Halloween.
Should put some Ajax spinners in there somewhere.
Please.
Just a Easter egg that, like, after you create 3 nodes, it like automatically shuts you out.
Take a break. Sorry, I can't turn your shoes off.
Yeah. Any more questions?
Question? Yes.
How do panelizer pages work with search? Do they get ignored by the search indexing, or do they get?
There is no search.
Yeah, we didn't have search requirements for the topics pages because we put these 6 pages into our main Solar search engine on our corporate site. So that's where there's no search on these pages. These are destination or landing pages.
But for the site search, if you're searching the site, do they get included in the
Yes.
search pages?
For external search, I built a second sitemap XML for uploading to Google, and then we included them in our Solar index.
Yeah, and one of the things that we didn't show, the node, the topic node is a title, a panelizer field, and then we have an extra like description field. And so that description field isn't rendered on the page, but it goes into the metadata. So for Open Graph and
Yeah.
like Google search, it'll pull that's rendered in the header. Yeah. So if there aren't more questions, we could like pull up the site and mess around, do a little demo for a couple minutes, or
Yes.
yes.
Do you still have access?
Brian's got it up.
Okay. I'll let Brian.
What kind of?
What do you want to see? Yeah.
Robert says not the prod environment.
Oh yeah, that's.
Oh, we were gonna take it down.
That was the plan, yeah.
I thought that was part. I thought you knew
There's
that.
nothing like a live demo of resurrecting Fred.
Can you show us a component in the pattern lab and then we
Yeah, I can do that.
I don't have pattern lab pulled down here, so you might need to.
Yeah, it might take me
you
a
might need to
second.
Get
You
to
could just pull up the repo too.
Yeah.
Can you guys explain about the gray backgrounds that are behind some of the elements that we can't see? It doesn't matter.
What about them? The fact that they're there?
They're
or-
there.
Projector resolutions are notoriously terrible. This has a gray background on it, and there are a number of other elements where there are subtle grays that you're not going to see on this screen, but you would see on a computer screen that's much higher resolution.
Contrast ratios are hard.
Yeah, accessibility is tough on all of us. You're okay. Sorry, this is gonna take me a minute. This isn't my computer, and it's not my setup. As a developer, I'm only really type A.
Any other questions I can answer, or we can answer while she's figuring it out?
See,
I know it broke.
I wasn't entirely surprised by that.
Did we want to talk about Nerdstein at all?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So things I didn't mention. When you're digging into the components module, I really highly suggest, if you're interested in a integrated pattern lab and Drupal 8 experience, then I would highly suggest Googling the words Nerdstein and pattern lab and Drupal 8 and maybe components. Adam has a really great blog post that inspired a ton of the work that we did. We did experiment with a number of different pathways to get to where we got, but Adam's is by far the closest to what we ended up doing. And he has a really great blog post where he talks through how to do all of the things of setting up your pattern lab and having those twig files ingested into Drupal in a way that's usable in your theme.
I don't have the repo down on here on this machine if that's what you're after.
Oh, right, because
Yeah.
And I also want to point out, in case you guys are curious, all of our, especially our front end code, is all of our code public?
No, just the
Okay.
front end.
All of our front end code is public, and there are links to it on the large screenshots of the prototypes in our slide deck. So if you guys are interested in digging in more to the way that we're architecting things, you have access to all of this on the
And
interwebs.
part of the reason we do that is the AMA depends a lot on vendors to build one-off microsites, and everyone has like their own projects, and we want to make sure that we have a consistent look and feel across all these projects. So when developers come in or a company gets a contract to build a site, they can have it look like we want it to look.
So this is going to take me a second to get up and running, but if you guys, so I will pull up the organism that I was looking at earlier, which is our tools block, and you can actually see it on our topic page. If you dig around a lot, then you can see stuff that's not on Drupal yet. There we go. And we're downloading on DePaul Wi-Fi. Yeah, this is not going to happen.
So pull the repo up.
If people want to see this, I'll be around all weekend, and I have my laptop, which
It's all set up.
is
for
set
doing
up.
front end.
Yeah, is set up for front end development. So sorry, DePaul Wi-Fi. I can't.
I don't know
thank you so
if we wanted to look at though what just how to edit a page.
much. Yeah.
So Say one about, oh,
Oh, I have the theme.
all right, I'm gonna just step back.
No, I'm just gonna switch the theme.
Yeah,
back.
like demos.
Yeah, this is, lab demos have always gone
On other
flawlessly.
people's computer, for
Yeah.
4 people using one person's computer.
Okay, you're good now.
Okay, so, like, for example, Masquerade, I thought we had disabled this locally.
Yeah, I activated some test config.
Okay. So we do a lot with med students.
Good use case for config split here, though.
Yeah, and I think we actually have Masquerade turned off locally.
Yeah.
You just
Yeah.
turned it on, because
Yeah.
otherwise it'll show up on every page. So there are 2 things. We do only have the one, or these are...
As an admin, you get more options.
Yeah, so when we have different layouts, they'll be able to choose the layouts here. And then you can edit the page here, and just drag things around.
The dragon.
Can you change content?
What do you mean, change content?
Like the text in a member block or something.
You want to do it? Okay.
The words that it says is what I mean.
Yeah. So this is the edit screen. So you can see this is kind of a full nested edit page in right in the IPE. This is an example of the entity reference view mode selector. So you can see if we want to. This is local, right?
Yeah.
Yes. Environment indicator. So if we wanted to change this from a no image related to like a small image, we just change that drop down and hit update, and then the image pops up there. Again, you can have all the power of your regular Drupal site, reordering stuff, etc.
And so these are references to articles that live on a different website, and we pull in the associated images. They can use them if they want, but
So
I don't
they
know
can-
if they're...
Something. Okay, it's back. You're good.
Okay. Yeah. So you can drag and drop, save the content. Now you've got a kind of completely reordered page.
So they can do anything they want to do
That you've defined.
that we have defined.
That we've told them they can do.
Yeah.
Here. If we want to remove it, we can maybe do that. Oh yeah, there's next.
So these are all custom blocks?
Yeah, these are all custom blocks. Most of which just have a few fields. So this is just like a title, a description, and a link for the button.
Like your block placement, like your interface for block placement traditionally, like choked with a whole bunch of like custom blocks you created for individual pages?
Say that again?
Like the blocks UI.
No, so these don't appear on the block placement page. These are all like this config only exists on, or that's not config, but this only exists on the node itself.
Right.
In each like field panelizer instance.
Yeah. So if you were, we were basically not using the kind of standard block placement. But if you were to go in here and do place block, you would see every instance of every custom block that we've defined. So theoretically, you could somebody could go in and use those in the core block screen.
And one of the problems we have with this custom block library, and we'll probably, if we continue to use this, we're going to have to find a way to organize this better for content editors, because right now it's just one really long list of blocks.
Right, but the editor team doesn't really go into this at all. The way that they would add an existing block is to go into custom here. And so this is a list of all of the blocks, and the IPE even has a nice filter. So you can just type in tool and see all of the existing tools blocks. Click on plus, tell it where you want that tools block to go, and hit add, and then I'll add that right there. So we can put that up the top, save. So really the content team does almost all of their pretty much 100% of their layout management on the node pages themselves. They just go into the edit screens for kind of adding extra content if they want.
Yeah, and most of their interaction with the site is going to be on the front end. So it's a lot easier for them to understand how the page is going to be created than it is with them filling out form fields on like a node edit screen.
That's all our time.
Okay. All right.
Thanks everybody.